New videos every day.
I like to know things.
Okay, I'm John Breeding, and I'm going to talk about this thing called ADHD, so-called Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. I'm going to speak about this subject in 3 sections, okay? So this first video is going to address the diagnosis and its underlying assumptions. It's going to give a perspective about ADHD. And then I'm going to provide a few key principles and things to remember in part 2, oriented towards parents or any adult really who works with young people who may be caught up in some dynamic going down this slippery slope called an ADHD diagnosis, right? And then in the third part, I'm going to share a little bit on counseling children in a generic sense, about working with children in terms of their emotional dynamics and relationship dynamics. So part 1 is going to be the nitty-gritty about attention deficit disorder, so-called, and how that fits into this thing called biological psychiatry. I'm also using my book as a guideline, and I'm happy to share this one because this is a revised edition, updated and expanded, of The Wildest Colts Make the Best Horses. And the cover is a great one from a photographic image from Tony Stromberg, and Mike Williams actually laid out the cover for me. So thank you to those 2 guys. The Wildest Colts Make the Best Horses. That's a really great title for a book about this that includes commentary on children and on those likely to be diagnosed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I like to joke about that the alternative title from the point of view of biological psychiatry would be Poor Sick Children Need Drugs in Order to Cope with Life. Instead, the wildest colts make the best horses, defending the spirited nature of our young people. That's where I'm coming from, and that's where wildestcolts.com comes from. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is one that I like to address as a diagnosis just because it happens to be the most popular one for children. First, a little statistics. In 1970, there was an estimated 200,000 children on psychotropic drugs, stimulant drugs, in the United States. That was enough to cause the U.S. Congress to be alarmed and call for a special congressional investigation. At that time, the drugs that are typically used to treat so-called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, back then it would be called hyperactive or hyperkinetic. Same process, same stimulant drugs. At that time, 1970, right after that, they were classified as controlled substances by the Drug Enforcement Administration because of their high addictive potential and risk of abuse, along with cocaine, along with methamphetamine, and now we're talking about Ritalin and the Adderall type drugs, which are the most popular ones now. Virtually identical effects profile to cocaine and methamphetamine, right? Well, in spite of classifying it that way, in spite of the Drug Enforcement Administration putting controls on it, between 1970 and 2000, 30 years later, you have about a 4,000% increase in the number of children on psychiatric drugs, school-age children. So from 200,000 to maybe 8 million. Now we estimate more like between 12 and 15 million if you include the various classes of psychotropic drugs, and probably at least 6 to 8 million on the stimulant drugs, and the majority of those for so-called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So it's huge. What I want to emphasize to you in this little segment is that if you're going to have any semblance of a clear view of reality on this subject, you have to be very, very strong on distinguishing what's fact, what's theory, what's opinion. Because what happens is that opinions are presented as if they're facts, such as attention deficit disorder is a real mental illness. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is neurologically or biologically based. The appropriate treatment is stimulant drugs. See, these are presented as facts in the newspapers, in the magazines, on the televisions, on the radios by the doctors. And you can accept this as fact based on that authoritative opinion, or you can just see that is an opinion. And the scientific fact is what? It's that there is no objective test. There is no physical or chemical abnormality that's defined. And this is not only true for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it's true for any problem routinely seen by psychiatrists. It's a bigger picture. How does that work? Okay, real quickly. The basic assumptions are real simple of biological psychiatry. Social adjustment is good. Failure to adjust is due to, not physical problems, not emotional problems, not systems problems or faulty schools or overstimulation or too much TV and video or sleep deprivation or family trauma, child abuse. It's none of those things. Failure to adjust is a result of mental illness. Failure to adjust in school is a result of ADHD. That's the assumption. This is not scientific facts. These are just assumptions, but it's important to understand them. Social adjustment is good. Failure to adjust to school is a result of ADHD. Third assumption, ADHD is biologically or genetically based. That's an assumption. Zero scientific evidence to support that. No objective test. No identifiable physical or chemical abnormality. The best way to back off a doctor on this? So show me the lab test. Can you do a test to diagnose and identify this physical or chemical abnormality? Show me the scientific literature whereby you can identify the signs to distinguish someone who has this alleged disease and someone who doesn't. That's how you back off the doctors, because the answer is they can't do it. These assumptions are very important, that there's this mental illness, ADHD, that it's biologically or genetically based, because that's what justifies the next step, which is called the treatment, which is called a biological treatment, which is called a stimulant drug, which is known to affect the heart in a bad way, which is known to stunt growth, which is known to cause all kinds of problems with virtually every organ system in the body. That's how you get to call that drug, which on the one hand, if you sell it to somebody in a schoolyard, or if you buy it at the college, or if you whatever, it'll get you a prison sentence. But in this case, it's a medicine for a child. See, that's a belief system, that's an assumption, that's a rhetoric, that's a claim to virtue that allows us to close our eyes and say we're giving medicine to our children, when what's really going on is we're using stimulants drugs to control their behavior and to shut them down. That's the bottom line in terms of how this works. Okay, so there's that part. Attention deficit disorder is a made-up notion created in committees of the American Psychiatric Association, ADD in 1980, ADHD in 1987. It leads to massive drugging of our children. It's a huge profit market for the pharmaceutical industry. And that's a skinny on that, and that's the end of this part one.